Welcome to Webcertain TV. I'm Gemma Houghton. Today my guest is Norm Rose, President of Travel Tech Consulting, and we're going to be talking today about how emerging technologies are affecting the global travel industry. Hi Norm, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
So technology and travel are kind of really topics that go together a lot nowadays, and there's a lot of talk about the use of technology in travel. Why has this demand grown so much in the past few years?
Well, what's really changed is that technology is now in the palm of your hand. And the fact that you have this smartphone, that you can access information any place, anytime, has turned the tables on what the role of technology is from a traveler perspective. Therefore, every part of the value chain has to now be sensitive to the fact that the traveler actually may have more information than the supplier or the intermediary who's providing services to the traveler.
And it's a challenge for kind of tourism brands to kind of discern between all of these technologies, which ones actually are worth the investment and which ones they should be putting their time and effort into, which ones are going to have the most value to them.
Well, to really try to make it more simple, it's all around the customer. So it's customer insight. So what types of technologies are going to give you better understanding of the customer patterns and the ability to maybe personalize things more to specific groups. Yeah, I would want to say that there is a little bit of a hype, there's a lot of hype around lots of things in travel technology, but as far as personalization, because for a leisure traveler who maybe is infrequent, who's going to travel twice a year, the idea of personalization is a little overhyped right now. What really needs to be done is contextual relevance, so that wherever I am, whatever I need to do next, that's what I'm going to need help with. So rather than thinking about the fact that it's my birthday or that it's, that I like red wine or whatever the personalization craze is, it's more about contextual relevance, which is not an easy thing to determine. But
what really matters to people is their life being made easier? Is their experience being improved? Rather than, oh, does this person know it's my birthday? So,
and in general, around emerging technologies, there is that problem of hype. And I don't know if you're familiar with, there's a consulting firm called Gartner that does a technology hype cycle every year. And I love that curve because it goes really, really high and then drops off. And the top is like the peak of disillusionment. It's like we get to that point where we're so excited about virtual reality, we think it's going to replace tourism, and oh no, it's not quite there yet. Then it falls down, and then we're slowly climb up again. I think that it's important for all people involved in tourism and travel to try to discern what's real now versus what's more futuristic, and then how can I apply that to really make the customer experience better, as you had said a moment ago. And
that's also the challenge with the hype. It's very difficult not to get caught up in hype because you see it there, you read all these blogs or articles and you're thinking, oh, everybody's doing this, we must. How, what, other than, of course, you need to understand what it is that you need to achieve, but how do you see through the hype? How do you discern which is worth investing a bit more time, and even if it's just a research, and which ones really should be left aside?
Well, this is kind of the space I've been in for a long time, and yesterday I did a session on blockchain, which is an emerging technology that people should be paying attention to. But at the same time, I tried to boil it down into the basics. But one of the panelists made a very good suggestion. The best thing people can do is do the research themselves. So rather than just accepting face value, whatever the source of the information you're getting through either the travel press or you're getting through the general press, look a little bit further and see exactly what's being done, what is actually being implemented by travel companies today, what value it gives to the customer, what value it gives to the travel company. And do your homework is really the key to try to avoid the hype, and just be aware that we're in a hype cycle constantly about everything, and travel's no different, travel technology is no different.
And you mentioned blockchain there, and that is, again, that is something that is talked about now quite a lot. Is this something that needs to be considered? Are we going to be seeing this kind of technology really becoming more mainstream anytime soon?
Well, I think the best analogy I can give you is that if you think about talking with me about the internet, which I was doing in the late 80s and early 90s, people had trouble conceiving what the internet is. So the thing about blockchain, the first important factor is to understand that it's really not about the faucet. I showed a picture of a faucet yesterday. It's about the plumbing, which is what I'm simply saying is that everyone's very focused in on the user interface and how it's going to affect, is it going to change the online travel agent or the traditional travel agent, the tour operator, and it's the infrastructure that's going to change. So we're very early. It's kind of early internet from the late 80s, early 90s, and it's a different platform that's being built. So it is going to change things. It could speed up settlement. It can increase transparency. It could change the nature of loyalty. There's lots of things, especially cross-border settlement and things like that. And there are actual real value things that are going to come. But it's going to be baby steps for a little while. I think we'll see a change 2 to 3 years. But by the end of this year, we'll see some transactions on blockchain. So,
it's definitely something to have in mind. It's something to be considering.
And the best thing is to do your homework. Try to understand it. Try to understand terms. I mean, certainly the video, I'm sure, is available through ITB. You can watch it on YouTube. And there was a good discussion with both, one of the new companies at Winding Tree, which, full disclosure, I'm actually an advisor with that company. And then we had also TUI and Amadeus on stage. So that was a good interchange on about the subject. And I think it was a good starting point for people.
And another kind of technology that's much more embedded now is the idea of kind of conversational technology, chatbots, those kind of interactions that are having. They seem to have had quite a big impact in that industry, and they're quite widely used. How effective are they for brands, and what are the kind of challenges and risks of using them? Well,
I'm smiling because I live in the Silicon Valley, and so I attend a lot of general tech things. And I was at an AI conference around June of last year, and the people on stage were saying, oh, remember when we were so into chatbots around 6 months ago? That's so passé at this point. While the travel industry is still, wow, this is really exciting. So I've done a lot of research on chatbots, and I know a lot of the companies are providing this. And the key is, where does it fit in to probably more the customer service side of business? I think that thinking about it as like an intelligent assistant that's going to answer all your questions, whether you're at the hotel or whether you're a travel agent or however it's implemented, it's a little bit beyond the capabilities of these systems right now. But determining what can be offloaded to that. So there's a company in the Silicon Valley called Mezi, which has actually pivoted from kind of a general assistant to travel to now corporate travel. And they did maybe even a further pivot where now they're working with travel management companies specifically, trying to figure out, okay, which things does an agent not have to be involved with, which things can be handled by the chatbot, and which is going to require an agent. The most dangerous part about the chatbot is that if it fails, it can actually have a bad brand effect. It can affect the way people feel about your brand. And so there has to be some caution when implementing this, but I think it can offload a certain amount of work.
Yeah, and it's about, like you say, it's not a very quick fix. You can't just plug something in and leave it. It does have to be tested. It has to be worked on to figure out where it can be helpful, and like you say, where it can't, you need to tell the customer up front, we can't help you here, go elsewhere.
Well, one of the things about machine learning, which is a type of artificial intelligence, is you need a lot of data. So if you're going to try to understand where it's helpful and so forth, you need to improve its accuracy over time by feeding it lots of data. And so that's a little bit of a misnomer, thinking that you can just implement something and leave it. But there has been a lot of advance in another type of artificial intelligence, natural language processing, and that's what's enabling the either text or voice understanding. And that, and of course, voice is a different subject we can talk about, but it's definitely improving, and it's improved from the time that maybe you and I experienced a very frustrating interaction to now something that is approaching a little bit better understanding.
And that, now that you mention voice, I mean, it is worth talking about, because certainly, especially in search, that's something that's really becoming such a conversation now, and really I hear a lot of businesses talking about what they're doing to prepare for voice search.
Well, there's no question that we're moving to voice search, and I've looked at this for a long time and kind of anticipated it. The problem is where in the queue are you going to be? Because if I'm talking to Alexa and I'm asking about what's the cheapest flight between Barcelona and Berlin, where's it going to access that information? How is that information going to be processed? And then when I want to book, if I do want to book through voice, which I think is a little bit of a stretch right now, especially if it's an expensive ticket, even though we'll see some of it happen. So I think voice ends up being a component. You know, maybe it will be, I'll interact with voice and then it'll show up on my smartphone or on my digital TV, HD TV. I mean, it's going to be a combination of things. But the biggest concern I have is where in the queue do you sit, and how do you then, as a travel company, compete with these mega OTAs who have such power to be able to be front and center as the first resource when you do ask Alexa or you ask Google. Of course, Google's going to give you the ITA software the solution, the Google Flight solution or their hotel solution. So, and
this is the big concern that I know a lot of, you know, is around voice, is the fact that, you know, you get this one answer. So for a start, it doesn't really give you any opportunity to make comparisons or decisions of your own. It's almost like this is you'll have people think, well, this is the correct answer, which of course is never going to be the case. And also how anybody other than Google, Amazon, Expedia, the really big brands, are going to have a chance to compete.
So I actually was sitting at dinner last night with one of the big meta search folks, and he was actually in charge of the whole Amazon rollout. And he basically said he came to the conclusion that search is not appropriate for voice. That's much more customer service, like, is my flight on time? So it ends up being similar to the conversational interface we're talking about with chat, is where's the best place for voice within the cycle? And I think we will see booking via voice and move towards that, but the problem that you stated is the #1 issue, being able to compete.
And and I think that does require innovation. It requires imagination, creativity from brands as well to reach customers maybe in other ways and build that brand loyalty. I suppose that's always been important, but perhaps it's even more important now, brand awareness and brand loyalty.
Well, there's a concern in the industry, obviously, that we have new gatekeepers. Google being one, Apple being another, Amazon now, Facebook. And it's difficult to have the traditional strategy of reaching customers when there's these new gatekeepers who sit there saying, we will be the interface between the customer.
We'll decide if you can reach the customer or not.
And it's going to be a challenge. I think that it's very much goes back to our first part of the conversation. If you know your customer, you understand, and it doesn't necessarily mean the individual customer, but you know the customer patterns and things, then you can market your service directly through different channels to reach the customer for awareness, rather than depend upon the gatekeeper to be the place that you want to try to compete with, because you know how much money the OTAs spend on just Google advertising right now. On that kind of basis, there's no even point in trying to compete, is there? Because it's just not going to happen. No.
And what about kind of for new businesses starting? Because it's one thing for more established brands that will have that customer loyalty and that you say will have that kind of backlog of data and insight. But if you're a new startup trying to get into the sector, how do you even begin to get in front of those customers? How do you begin to know what to do?
I've done a lot of work with startups, and in fact, in addition to my consulting practice, I also work with Focusrite as an analyst, and I've helped them with the competition since it's now called the Innovation Platform. It used to be called the Travel Innovation Summit. So I've helped them since the inception of that program. So I have screened, and what I do is behind the scenes, I screen the startups. And the most difficult thing for these startups is a lot of them sometimes come from outside the industry, and they think they're solving a problem. Like if the pitch begins with, people go to X number of sites, so they can just come to our site and they don't need to do travel planning across sites. That's assuming there's a problem that doesn't exist. And so I think the issue with the startup is combining the unique technology offering and an understanding of what the dynamics of the industry is. And that second piece is very, very difficult for them to understand, especially if they're coming from out. It is very difficult. I was interviewed by the FocusWire folks at the conference, the Focusrite conference, and they asked me on a scale of 1 to 10 what I felt as far as the innovation that was being shown, the very companies that I had screened. I said it was a 5. I said the quality of presentation is about an 8. The presentations are much better, but the innovation is difficult. Yeah. And part of that goes back to the earlier question around blockchain, is that the gentleman who began the whole effort with Winding Tree was a software developer who was frustrated that the application programming interfaces, the APIs that are available from the industry, are not very robust. Yeah. So if you're programming against a GDS, you're programming against an OTA or whatever, you're basically limited to the functions there. You can't completely change the process. So things like blockchain have the opportunity to perhaps open things up, to have a little bit more of a kind of a Linux moment for the travel industry, where developers from around the world actually will start working on trying to change the process. Yeah. And that's difficult in an industry where we have some very powerful players who are very well situated and can kind of block innovation. So it's a difficult issue. It's not an easy one to overcome.
Do you think there is still going to be a place over the coming years for smaller brands, for smaller businesses to really be there and be visible, or do you think it is going to go more down the direction of these bigger players that are really going to corner the market?
We've actually seen that already. I mean, we've seen both through acquisition and just pure market strength and dominance, and because Google is such a dominant way that people search and the money that's paid to position these people. But there's a startup I work with that is kind of attacking the small business marketplace. And they were they had a lot of SEO smarts about them. And so when you do a search in Google on corporate travel policy, it's the name of the company is 30 Seconds to Fly, they show up on the first screen. Yeah. Now that type of ability for some small little company to show up on the first screen is still there. Yeah, despite the amount of money that's paid there. So this has always been the case. Yeah. But there was a point where I'm sure you had a Nokia phone in your pocket.
Of course. Oh yeah.
You don't anymore.
No.
There's a lot of people who had Blackberries in their pockets. You don't anymore. So any existing company can be displaced, including the large OTAs, if things change. And things will always change. Technology will always drive change. So I'm optimistic that we are going to be able to see small players compete.
That's good news for many, I'm sure. So just finally then, if out of all the hype of all these technologies that are coming, which one do you think is the one to really pay attention to in 2018?
So I think we have to pay attention to voice and see how that unfolds, because the stats around the adoption of voice search, especially by younger generations, is pretty significant. So, and I think when people get accustomed to interfacing with technology in a certain way, it then bleeds into the travel process, and it's bound to impact the travel process. So we talked about some of the obstacles and challenges of being in the queue and all the other things, and the simplicity. Is it customer service or is it search? But in reality, every company has to pay attention to the fact that in the home, there is now a Google Home, or there's an Amazon Echo, or there's a Apple, whatever, iHome, whatever it's called. I'm not sure. I don't think iHome's the correct term. That is going to be a place where people will both shop for groceries and things, and keep track of things, as well as bleeding into the travel process. So I think that's going to be the one to look near term. I think a little longer stretch, over 2-3 years, blockchain is going to be significant, and certainly looking at an open environment where there's a lot more ability for individual developers to make a difference. I think we're going to see the beginning of a change there. And I still believe that the travel industry hasn't caught up with mobile. I mean, I started preaching about mobile in the early 2000s. I did my first study, and it's amazing in all the sectors how they're not recognizing that mobile is now the starting point for so much. And
it's actually quite crazy to think that there's conversations around like AI and VR and blockchain, yet sometimes the mobile experience is poor, and it's like, why would you be thinking about AR if somebody can't book on your website?
I mean, you've got to have the mobile strategy down. And so much of the industry does not. And they can't think of it as another channel. They need to think of it as the channel, because that's where everything's moving. Yeah,
absolutely. That's some very good advice there and some great insights. Thank you very much for talking to me.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.